This video is your video prompt for the second assignment of WRD 103, the rhetorical analysis of Christopher Hitchens' Believe Me, It's Torture. Since I do reuse these videos from quarter to quarter, check the prompt itself for the due dates for both the peer review draft and the final draft for this. But the other information that will be relative for this. So as with all the assignments, the rhetorical analysis has a couple of specific goals. These are things that we're practicing in 103 as a genre class. The first one is our use of thesis. Essay 1, your thing project, wasn't thesis driven, but essays 2, 3, and 4 will be. So we'll be working a lot with this during the rest of the quarter as well. We're also going to be looking at analysis as well. So you're literally going to be looking at the rhetorical elements within Hitchens' essay, how he uses those to persuade an audience as well. But then you need to provide evidence of this analysis. So that's textual evidence that you're using to support assertions and observations you're making within the text as well. So before you actually start drafting this paper, there are a couple of things you should probably do. You should read the What is Rhetoric document, which is in the essays section of the class site as well. This is going to cover the basics of ethos, pathos, and logos, as well as some other major kind of rhetorical points as well. I would also, if you weren't in class for the inferences and observations workshop, look at the PowerPoint. I will attach that to the prompt for this assignment as well. Once you've done those, you should be ready to do this as well. So for this assignment, you're basically trying to not only understand the argument, but think about how it works as a piece of writing as well. So I ask 3 questions whenever we do our discussions in class. So what's the essay about? How does, what's your dominant impression? What's the essay about, and how does it work? So that's literally what this assignment is we are then trying to understand the techniques and tools that the writers used. One of the major assumptions that we should be working on is that no essay that we're going to read this quarter, something is there accidentally. Everything that is in the essays is going to have been there intentionally. The writer is doing this to specifically persuade or affect their audience in some format as well. So we're kind of thinking about how these things all work together. So one of the best pieces of advice you could also give for rhetorical analysis is read the Hitchens essay a couple of times, at least 3 times minimum. I would read it the first time with just kind of like that idea of a dominant impression. What are you getting? What are you seeing here as well? And then go back and see if you can identify, maybe read it a second time. And then on the third time, start trying to identify, okay, rhetorical techniques. Where do you see ethos? Where do you see pathos? Where do you see logos? Who is the audience? What's the tone that he's using? Things like that. Try to identify these things as well. You will need to, one of the elements of this, in the same way that for essay 1 you had to do a description of your object, I do want a brief summary of what's happening as well. Part of the reason why we would do that, it would probably happen fairly early in the essay. It may not happen in the introduction, but it may happen immediately after the introduction and thesis as well. You can't assume that your reader has read the essay, so they need a little context for what you're doing. Keep in mind the same thing that we talked about in the toolbox. Neutral, non-judgmental, and verifiable as well. So this idea, those are the types of things that you're looking for, where you're not making an argument in your summary, but just kind of setting it up. So what you can look for in this essay is a number of things. These are and this is not a full list of the things that you can look at for this as well. But these are kind of, at least give you a starting point. Kind of the purpose of the argument. Is it to inform? Is it to convey, persuade, explore, make decisions, meditate, pray? The appeals used. So you could literally hinge this on ethos, pathos, and logos. What claims are made and what evidence is used to support those claims? Are these claims valid? Is it strong evidence as well? Who is the writer's audience? This idea of an audience analysis is, I think, really important. So in this case, it's Vanity Fair. Vanity Fair magazine, like who reads Vanity Fair? What could we say about that audience? What the idea of the infamine, we talked about this in they should have read about this in the What is Rhetoric document. Are there unstated assumptions that the writer is making about their audience that appears within the text as well? What's the writer's tone or attitude towards the subject? So when they're writing about this, I mean, is it playful? Is it serious? Is it whatever? But that's what I'm saying. What's their tone? Does this help or hurt his or her argument? How do the components contribute to the parts as whole? So is there an equal balance of these elements within there? Is there like more ethos and very little pathos, or vice versa? And how does it all work together? And finally, is the writer successful in their argument purpose as well? Again, don't try to answer all these questions. And matter of fact, we'll get down to this in just a second as well. I would suggest for the best article, or the best of these rhetorical analysis, you're going to only pick maybe one, maybe two different of these elements to kind of focus on as well. I'd rather see a thorough discussion of a couple of points. Maybe you're just talking about ethos, or just talking about audience, or just talking about tone, rather than a just thin discussion of many. And again, this is another thing. The goal of this assignment is not for you to get to the end of it and say, oh, waterboarding is torture, or waterboarding isn't torture. If that literally is your conclusion, you should go back and re-look at it. You're not arguing about whether it is or isn't torture. That's Hitchens' argument. What you're doing is you're arguing about whether the essay is or is not effective. And that may also be the focus of your thesis. Hitchens' use of ethos is effective in persuading his argument because of XX and Hex. Those are the types of things that you're going to be looking for as well. Refrain from agreeing or disagreeing with the author throughout the analysis. So then, the things that I'm looking for within this, one of them is going to be an introduction. I will tell you that for essay 2, 3, and 4, we're going to be thinking about introductions, and actually for essay 1, about how do we capture our readers' attention, how do we can give them a reason to continue arguing as well, or reading as well. For this one and essay 3, it probably doesn't need to be a super long introduction. I would suspect like your introductions for essays 1 and 4 will probably be longer. Essays 2 and 3 are probably going to be a little bit shorter. You need to kind of give us a context, a reason why we're talking about this. Have a clear thesis to tell us what you plan to do with it, and then moving into the summary of what the essay is about so the reader has context as well. Analysis as opposed to summary. So this is, I have to say, is the pitfall of this assignment. Lots of people will sit there and just summarize. Well, Hitchens does this, and then he got strapped to a board, and then he does this as well. You want to have the organizing principle, not necessarily the chronological order of what happened within the essay itself, but rather the rhetoric elements, so that it may end up being that he uses pathos in this section, he uses ethos in this section right here, and have that be the organizing principle. A thesis statement that addresses how the author constructed his or her arguments. Again, the thesis statement is your roadmap for your audience. Is tell your audience what you plan to do, and using it as a kind of means of preparing them for what's going to happen as well. I've already said this, but a narrow scope. Try to do maybe 1 or 2 things, not 6 or 7 things. That'll leave, if you do a lot, that's going to lead for a fairly surface paper. Again, specific examples from the text about your claims for his rhetoric choices as well. These are the ground floor for a solid argument. Since you are only pulling from the Hitchens essay itself, you don't necessarily need to put page numbers in there, but if you would like to do that as like an early practice with MLA citation, you can, but it is not a requirement. Only time you would have to have some citations is if, at this point, if you brought outside information into this as well. And I would probably suggest for this paper, I'm much more interested in what you have to say than pulling in sources from outside as well. So I'd probably say not do that. The ideas logically build from one to another within and from one paragraph to the next. And then finally, it does have a conclusion that briefly summarizes what you did and offers kind of your kind of assessment, is effective, is not effective as well. Again, I suspect both the introduction and the conclusion for this essay are not going to be particularly long. Again, there is a video of Hitchens that you may want to watch here as well about him being waterboarded. This was something, remember they videotaped this along when they were actually doing it as well. There is a copy here as well, some images in it as well from Vanity Fair itself. I think it's always interesting. The one that I have in the essay section is a Word document, so it's a little bit easier to take notes on it if you're doing it that way. But also usually looking at the original format can also be interesting as well. All right, I hope this was helpful.